Yake yuxatini stakatiwan. Hakte yakanahin. Yehoji kekogach saat. Gesendik akshui. Ya akwan ane kak. Gwell. Yende yegartusane ya ha hitki. Dasa dat dasa ayik. Hatuasuku yanmunei. Gwell isaku. Kelchushugo a de wudukai we kuwat a kakusi at. Yak away washtan kwan ani Fahrenheit. Ginjitron ani koa Celsius. Gwalheshtis tu at aka hin wudlitik. Yak koa nasjan katkadech. Yewe telkadein hosaku we Celsius. Yakudzage at koa ka meters waitatsu. Washtan kwan ko koas to tosaku chakutat. Just chakuge aya yehwaji. Chaan koa hin wudlit iki ayanach kekakoch saat. Ya sandich akshui. Ye awe gwell yende yegartusane yaha hitki. Yewe adati tuchtatan. Ya yegi hachuche haswutien we National Endowment of the Humanities ye jene. Wuke aya hastu inyuk achtatan. Yata awe hausatini at an kadushiti at cha adu sayuk ewatan. Du yate ak kwalqain weta. Asai kudzatiqo atlet khaq inach meeting owl. Ya ohan kasha tuashku. Shukwaya utisatini. Ye awa putu. Ye awa wusho tu skayan. Ye sai hatuati. Kasha tuashku tsisk Dutch. Kasha tuashku hakuche uti. Akhwawe shakatka kasha tuashku tsisk hastu yet hasawar qaini. Achawe a kaudu a hate, kaudutle hate. A joy ye sayo a katwatu a sa. Soran katu. Soran katu. Yikakus da soet let kakinach. Shukwa koa yikakus yituasaku. Shingit kinach yuk ayil atki. Ekwake.
I heard like a tenth of that.
Oh, shingit shukwa. Shingit. Oh, how? Ye owa. Kehasik ye owa. Ketla di a haskoa awak gach dikitgia gokt gwashte ha ani dachas kauta yich ich kide.
Kanwak? Sama?
Awak. Yukshe?
Kanwak. Kanwak.
Dua achch.
Sauron?
Oh, Sauron. Sauron katu. Sauron katu. Didua sa gweta. Ichach bawus wa nachsayat leit chalkinach. Shukwa wuchin yuchatitla at klingit kinach.
Walk ian yuke. Tlech achwa yuke.
Tsukke. Yuchatank. Iti asandik ak tuasugul de kat Johan Yisachwa achi Lingít kinach yuch achli atki. Chadasa dat. Chadasa dat. Okay. What did I say about this thing in the middle of the room?
It's like sour.
It's the katu. What's katu, Isikuke?
Happy person?
Hmm?
Happy person?
Tuusagu. Katuusagu would be. I guess you'd say tuusagu will ka would be a happy person.
It's a person, or it's a person inside.
Well, it's a compound name. So katu it's a compound, it's the name of a thing. So we can't think, because the literal interpretation would be, yeah, a person's feelings, a person's thoughts, a person's spirit, a person's intentions.
Therapist.
Hmm?
No, not therapist. Okay.
It's sati. Tsatsi.
Tutsi.
Gwashia ach. Ade awe ke awashia. Idatawe tututla atk. Tututli atk. Idat you tututli atk. Wait, dot you to tutli. No, you to dutli atk. How? Hatu is a little bird. When you hear it singing,
Zisk.
it's tisk.
Oh.
When you hear it singing, someone's thinking of you. Got a little black head and a little gray body.
Chickadee.
It's a chickadee. It is. Well, it's a tsatsi, but it's a chickadee.
Tutsi.
So there's this thing in the middle of the room, which has been going a little haywire lately, just the way it looks around. I was kind of interested in these things, and we've been trying it out, and we'll see. I'll switch cameras probably eventually. It's called the meeting owl, and we don't like that name. So I said, we got to come up with a new name. And someone suggested the Eye of Sauron, and then someone else suggested Khatuwu for chickadee, because the Eye of Sauron, like, looks at you when they make a noise or when they do something, right? It looks at them. It's like, oh, that's kind of ominous, and because a lot of indigenous peoples, a lot of Native American peoples, don't like owls. Don't like owls, especially wouldn't like an owl in a room, and especially wouldn't like an owl looking at them. And so we knew right away that we had to give this thing a new name. So Khatuwu was a neat idea, because when it makes a noise, someone's thinking of you. So it was a neat connection. So then, since they both came up with the names at the same time, we went with Sauron Khatuwu. So the chickadee of Sauron, because it does look kind of like a little tower. I know you folks can't see it out there, but you could, if you haven't seen one, you could look it up on the internet. Okay. So next Tuesday, I expect to hear from everybody. At the beginning of class, just bring a couple of sentences that reveal things you are thinking about. So something a little more complex than wasa iati, and something that reflects your current state of mind, even if it's just a little sliver of it. So we're going to start moving towards pushing ourselves to be more conversational. It does not have to respond to anything anyone else says, but if you want to respond to what someone else says, then we all just level up. We go from like little running around Mario to big Mario. And then when we start just full on talking, we're throwing fireballs Mario. So that's the goal, is to keep trying some stuff in our language production. What kinds of things was I talking about earlier?
Kusiat.
It's going to be cold. Kekukuch sa'at. Inde yigach tu sene yaha hitki. Dasa adat kadasa ayih.
Kuhaantí.
Kuhaantí, the weather. Inde ye gachtusane hahitki dasa adat dasa ayik takte yaqnahin. Huh? Yande ye gachtusane hahitki dasa adat dasa ayik. Let's take a look. So let's try this. Yende ye gachtusane. So we'll go find ne.
They is like working or doing the activity, right?
It's doing, yeah. So we'll go down and we're looking for something that starts with yun and has an S classifier. There it is. Probably didn't need ye. I could just say yende gachtusane. It doesn't just mean finish it. It means we're going to get it ready. So you could say yende gachtusane hahitki. Dasa adat, dasa ayik. Akte yaqnahin. Winter's coming. We're going to get our houses ready, things that are around it, things that are inside of it. It's just kind of stuff that I've been thinking about because we're going to go below freezing, I think, this weekend. Yeah, I heard it from a little bird. It's maybe the weather app. I don't know. It's probably the news. Okay. All right. Any type of language questions you folks got? Anything you've been thinking of?
Is Kuhaantí literally the weather, or is it something else?
It's the weather. It technically could be people are being, but I don't think anyone would interpret it that way.
Yeah, alright.
So the confusion is you have k, which is an object preverb for people, and you have k, which is a noun that you can put onto a verb, which means a given area. But then that one is used a lot for the weather. So like sa'at, it's cold. Qsi'at, it's cold weather. Yata, it's hot. Quwata, it's hot weather.
Okay, cool,
Exact same thing. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Tuesday, you should say at least 2 sentences at the very start of class. All say something. Just to practice being language producers, because we are working a lot on language reception, but production is a really big part. Okay. So I thought we'd start this stuff. So we started running into quite a few of these things. Around, through, along. I think I'll switch cameras. So thinking of these types of things. So these are all direction and location terms. And so as we're thinking about them, I thought it's a good time to just go over them. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to go over just some big concepts, how this stuff works. And we're going to start looking at some lists of things. Then we'll start looking at place names. Then we'll take a break. Then we'll go back into our translation of our story. And we'll start to see these things, right? So one of the things about learning Lingít, I think, is the progression is like, we've talked about this, beginning Lingít, making sounds, learning words, learning phrases, fill in the blank, little bit of structure towards the end. Intermediate Lingít, we start to do a little bit more. So we start to get into translation, interpretation, trying to say things, recognize things at a larger level. And then we start learning about the structure of the language. We go over nouns, how to possess them, how to alter them. We go over how to add suffixes. Then we go over direction and location. And basically, we learn these concepts. And then part of this stage of Tlingit learning is saying, here's a bunch of these things. Go dig through these box of Legos and see what's in there. Right? Because there's a whole bunch of things. And I've tried to arrange these in terms of what you're going to most commonly run into. But then I just want you to know that there are lists and lists of these things that are out there. And we'll talk about how they work, and we'll look at a bunch of examples. Then we'll get back into the story, and then you'll start to spot them all over the place. You've already used a bunch of them. So we'll go through it, ask questions as you got them. So this helps us to see Lingít tundatáani. And with Lingít tundatáani, how would you interpret that word? Lingít tundatáani.
Lingít mind.
Lingít mind, yes. Might be other ways. Any other thoughts?
Does ani in it? Is that related or is that something else?
It's part of the noun. It's just part of the noun. So you could also interpret this as thinking in Tlingit, the Tlingit thought world, Tlingit thinking, right? So as we talk about Lingít tundatáani, we've talked about this a couple times. You just have to think about things a little bit different because it's a different language. Word order, the ways that you would say it, the types of verbs you would pick, the way you might categorize things. So there's 3 different categories of these direction and location terms. The first one is a very small list of things that are relative to the speaker. So whoever's talking, it's only relevant to them, right? It's always related back to the speaker. Near me, away from me, far away from me, right? Around us. It's kind of all of them. There's really just like 5 of them. There's very few of them. But they do get used a lot. And what we're going to find is we're going to learn these basic concepts. Then we're going to see that there's some things that we can add to a whole bunch of different things. The second one is how 2 objects would relate to each other. This is where you start getting into around, over, below, near, those types of things. Then the third is these fixed universal points. The ocean is a big one. But you know, you have up high, down low, those types of things. So as we keep thinking about Tlingit, we think about why it's got some complexities to it, some of the things that are going to create challenges. I think there's a whole bunch of little things that smash together. That's pretty common with quite a few Native American languages. There's classification that goes on, living things, non-living things, stick-like things, empty things. You're going to run into a bunch of that stuff. We talked about that a little bit on Tuesday. Motion verbs are a huge sort of tricky thing. Pronouns are built into the verbs, and so are a bunch of other things that just affect. Like, so you will reach a point where a lot of your learning is just understanding verb prefixes. Because if you can unlock that, you could speak. Like, you have to unlock that to speak. Or else you can memorize and recite, but to be able to assemble and move the language around, you have to understand how those work. And then verbs conjugate for event instead of time. And so we'll just run into that now and then. We'll see things where the verb doesn't change if it's yesterday or right now. That's not the case all the time. Any questions about any of that stuff? Okay, so part 1, relative to the speaker. So you folks have seen this before, right? So here's the speaker right there. That person is speaking. In relation to them, they have these 4 senses of space. And it goes, ya, he, we, you. Everybody say ya.
Yeah.
Yeah. Heh.
We,
Weh.
What?
you.
You.
Yeah.
You.
So how do we interpret ya?
And like within
Right here.
Right here, I can hold it in my hand or touch it.
Right here. It could also, in some cases, be right now. What about he?
closer to you than the person you're talking
Hereby.
Yeah, nearby, closer to me than to you. There's probably two other ones I could think of.
Kind of, I think of it kind of like arm's reach type thing, maybe kind of the same room.
Yeah, like I can get it. I might have to lean
I can
over.
see it.
I don't have to travel to get it.
Do you use it in like a temporal sense with like soon or momentarily?
Yeah, sometimes it's like that, and sometimes it's just generally this direction. Like you'll say, "Hey, Shanatan with Kuhaantí," and that means open the door, and heyday is in there, right? And so it's also used for something right behind you,
Oh yeah, like
and it's also used for something that it's a little bit mysterious. Like if there's something crawling around in the ceiling,
it's in the song.
I might say "Das a he," right? It was just like it's kind of like it's nearby, but I'm not exactly sure where. How about weh?
Like over
Over
there,
there.
Over there, right?
but not like out of range.
Yeah, like I don't have to go to a different area to get that, right? So it's usually in the same, like it would all be in this room. If it gets out of this room, it's probably going to be you, because it's like, well, I gotta go out that door, go up the stairs, go over there. And so it's also, if you put it with you get awe, and that's probably the most common word in the Lingít language. And awe, which each of these you could put in front of them. Aya, ahe, awe, ayu. Let's do you first. So what is you?
Out of sight.
Over
Way over.
yonder.
Over yonder. Yep, way over there, including all known points, and also way back in the past or way in the future. A lot of times when they're talking about Raven from the stories, they'll either say ya yesh or you yesh. So these are used. So Tlingit does not have articles like the or a or n. It does not, like English kind of needs to have those, right? Because you just have a hard time if you say get in car, right? Hand me keys, right? It just sounds like there's something missing. In Hawaiian, you have to have articles, or else it sounds like you're saying names, right? You're like, what'd you do to that person named Pua? Kapua is flower, Pua is a person named Pua. But Tlingit does not have articles, but it uses these in similar ways. So you could say, get na dog, this table, way na dog, that table. If I'm ever in a meeting and two people have the same name, like how are we going to keep them straight? I'll point at the one closer to me, and I'll say, ya ku'ule. I'll point at one and say, we ku'ule. That's how I'm going to remember you both, right? So each of them can take right in front of it. A ya, a he, a we, a you. That is really a focus particle, so we call a focus particle. So it calls attention to something. Usually the thing you just said, but in this case, it forms a little new word. So when you say aya, awe, ahe, and ayu, you're saying this is, well, I guess I should have done ahe second. This is, that way over there is. So we've learned how to do this, right? Kit ayu, sa aya, right? So you're telling people where these things are, and you're saying like this is, that is. You can also use them like ya and we. Ya tsa, aqa, the seal, it was doing this type of thing, right? So we've also seen these, and you could put yacht. We're going to see that we could put a whole bunch of different things. We're going to learn a whole bunch of different suffixes. We're going to see what these things look like when you put the different suffixes on them. You've seen some of them with yad, yadu, hey do, way do, you do. So here's a visual example, right? You got tsao, this crab. Hey tsao, this crab that's kind of close to me but not right next to me. Wait tsao, this crab that's right there. You tsao, this crab that's on its way back to the beach. It's like, I'm out of here. So there's a related one, which is ha. So it gets a little tricky because there's at least three different ha's, right? So there's ha as in our, ha'ani, hakusi. ha'atchai. Then there's ha as an object. Ha dutzatin, we've been seen, right? Ha yak'e, we're good. And then there's this ha, which is different than those. Those two are related to each other. This one's a totally different thing. It means this area. And the most common way we hear this one used is hade, this way. Hagu, come over here. Yike hat yigudi, it's good that you came here, right? So here's some examples of that. So you have ha, and you could say hagu, hade, hatia, those types of things. And it's saying over this way, right? And you can use it for directional things as well. Like if we're in a monster movie, because it's almost Halloween, it's Gusu Jason Voorhees, Hade Yanagut, Yenyenede. He's on his way here, get ready, right? So Hade Yanagut. And you could just say that, it doesn't have to be ominous. It could be, right? You're waiting on a friend and they send you a text and they say, Yichande Yanchagut, I'm coming to you guys. You say, oh, Hade Yanagut. They're coming this way, right? But the ha, it only works for the people in the circle. So if you're on the phone and they're in a different place, it doesn't really work that well, okay? So, it's good that you came here, singular. It's good that you all came here, plural. Those have ha built into it. That's all of them. That's every single one in this first category. Ya, he, we, you, ha. 5 of them. Nice and easy, right? So that gets us to the second group. Now we get a bunch. Okay, so that's what this illustration was made for, was to get us to start thinking about how these things work. So this illustration shows you the 3 different types of words that are in these direction locational categories. So the first one would be like diki. Whoops. So diki, you see it's a word on its own. There's no dashes, no nothing on either side of it. So that means it's independent, it can just exist. You could say diki, way up high. You could also say diyi, way down low. So when we get to category number 3, that's what we're looking at, these universal points. The second type has this long dash, and that means it needs a word to come before it. That's the word that it relates to. So if you said nadak ak, between the tables, if you were to say nadak ak, next to the table, right? So those, you have a word that it belongs to, but they're still written as separate words. So if you say heen yik, that's 2 words. As yik, that's 2 words. And then the third thing that this illustration shows is if there's a hyphen. So you see that one's long, this one's short. And that means that attaches directly to the word. And these are suffixes. So what we have is we have a word, we have a relational word, and we have a suffix. So the term that I like to use for these is an independent base, a relational base, and a suffix. I call them a base because that just lets you know you can add a suffix to them. Because there are some that you can't. Like, so there's one I think that's not on here, which is nak, which we encountered in our Sahan story. And you can't say nakde or naknach, it's just nak. And so we call those a relational noun. It needs a noun to belong to, you cannot put a suffix on it. It means to be left behind. Any questions so far? So looking at this illustration, I think I said it, but what do you think tak is?
Next to.
Yeah, next to. Right. What about ak?
Between.
In
Between.
Between. Just say it. Just say it. Just say it. What about yin?
down,
Downward? Is it
Below.
below? Oh, below. Below.
Downward. I would say downward. I would say downward.
Okay.
What about kin?
Upward.
Right? And you're going to see a bunch of this stuff. K sounds up, Y sounds down. Because you're going to have kinde, yinde, kin, yin, K, ye, de ki, de yi. You're going to see just variations on it, but that K sound with the upward things, that Y sound with the downward things. Okay? What about ya?
The face of the surface of.
The face of, or the vertical surface of. Yeah, oh, what? What about de ki?
Above, way above.
Up high.
Up high.
Above.
Yep, up high. De yi,
Down below.
down below. Yep, way down low. What about nach as a suffix?
True.
Through.
It could also be along, but I would say your default meaning is through. De,
Or
Towards.
this one has a little tilde because we have a rule. Here's the rule. Open suffix, opposite of the tone before it. Closed suffix, always high. There's nach, it's high. There's dach, it's high. De can be high or low. It'll be the opposite of what. So you'll say hit de, nech de. What about tu?
Inside.
Inside. Closed containers, abstract things. What about talk?
Bottom surface.
At the bottom surface of it, usually a cavity. You're gonna find there's some wild things that you're gonna find. We'll have to review the napkin before we take our break. We'll try and review the napkin. Tayi.
Below?
under.
The underside, isn't it?
Those are close. Those are close. I wouldn't say below and I wouldn't say underside.
Like on the bottom,
bottom,
outside bottom.
Not quite the bottom.
Underneath.
Underneath. Underneath. So some of these are going to be like very similar types of concepts. Take,
Behind.
behind, behind. Da,
We just did this one.
Around.
around. What's that?
The
Dach,
away,
away
from.
from. Ha,
top,
on the top surface of.
On top of?
on top of. Yeah. But we'll also see in an open container, which is pretty wild. Like if you took a cardboard box and you put something in it and the flaps are open, it's kluk-ka. And if you close the flaps, now it's kluk-tu. And if you put something on top of that, now that's kluk-ka. It's just, I think it just has fun stuff like that. And I don't even know if yik should be on here anymore. So we went over yik. It means in a shallow container, which is really not in this. This ka would be this box is ka. And if something was in this box, it would be ka because it's open. So these are just some, I might have to erase that someday. I think I made this probably 12 years ago. Okay. Any questions?
I recognize yik from when we used it in the story last class.
Yes. So like once we start translating, I think we're getting to this point where we can say, okay, that's a verb, that's like a noun. Now we got to get all the things in between. And that's the goal with this. Okay. So relational nouns and suffixes. Again, a relational noun needs a noun to relate to, and it's going to come before it, right? And it won't take a suffix. So some of these, like if you look at the word shagun, Shagun on its own it's a really interesting word. It's one of these ones that has a bunch of different but related meanings. So it's the source of it, the origin, the background, the fundament, the elements, the components, the cause and effect of. It's the ancestor, it's the background, it's the clan, it's the hereditary. Um, so, for example, if I said Yaguk Shagun, I might tell you how this cup was invented. Someone made this type of lid, someone did, something. Or I might tell you how it came into my possession. I bought it from a company. It's not a big store. But the shagun could also be if I took something with a bunch of moving parts, right? Like my dad used to bring home telephones, like old telephones, and have us take it apart. Like it would work. And he'd say, take it apart, and we'd take it all apart. He'd give us all these little tools. And he says, okay, put it back together. Let's plug it in and see if it works, right? But when it was all taken apart, that would also be the shagun. It's all of its components, all of its parts. That's why the word jishagun is a tool. So it's a achjite, achjishaguni. Hand me my tool. But this is a word that if you start putting relational pronouns in front of it, now the word changes. So if I say shagun, what do you, oh, it's right here. I was going to ask you what it
It's
is.
already there. It's there.
So what would the difference be between shagun and shagun?
One's my, one's our.
Yes. So like if I said, I'm going to tell you about shagun, what do you think I'm going to tell you about?
You'll give us like your family tree.
Yeah, family tree, that's my shagun, right? If I say I'm going to tell you about shagun, sit down. I'm going to give you like the 8-hour lecture about how we're supposed to be, right? So shagun means everything we've ever been, everything we are right now, and everything we will become. So for me, that's a capital letter concept. It's very big, and then you'll hear people talk about it in their speeches. Okay, so
So
that's
what would somebody say if they wanted to tell me about yourself, like more like your story? Would that be like would it sounds like it'd be improper to say like Akshkalnik, like my story, or was that what you would say? Like what's the story? Like what's the story behind Hune, you know?
yeah, yeah. Well, so like I think when there was a speaker named Shuateen, Martha Van Heel,
Hmm.
and she used to pal around with another speaker named Tla Ida Kalmegan. They used to come down from Carcross to Skagway to sell moccasins. And I had always talked to Ida. And a lot of times in English, and as I started to learn Tlingit, I talked to her more and more in Tlingit. And when I had watched Martha, like Martha never really talked to anybody. I was like, oh, she's just quiet. I don't know. They were both elderly, so I didn't want to be invasive. I would just visit, I would say hi. But then one day, I was walking them to their car, and I said bye to Ida, and then I walked Shuateen around to her side of the car. I said, and then she looked at me, and then she just started speaking a whole bunch of Tlingit really fast, because she was a marvelous speaker of Tlingit. But she was almost not quite monolingual, but she certainly preferred Tlingit. And so then she said, I'm going to tell you about my shagun. And I knew she was going to talk about her lineage. But if we're getting to know each other and we're all speaking in Tlingit, I might say, Chan Kananik, Shagun da. Now I do want to know who's your parents, who's your grandparents. Tell me all about that stuff. But then if I wanted to say, Chan Kananik dato ekusti, tell me about your life. Right now, it has to be in the right social situation, or else I'm being nosy, right? Like I shouldn't be asking these in front of a bunch of people. But if you and I are just getting to know each other, I'd be like, "Kan kananik itat." Tell me about yourself, right? So I can also say that. Um, and so there's various ways to sort of get this information out, and then I could start talking like, "Guksaki what? Where did you grow up?" Guksa we shkun a tunachi iat. gudach, guchsa, shkun tunach, ye good. There, ya ye good. There it is, ya ye good. Where did you go to school? So, ye good. There it is, ye good. How is that so hard? Okay. So then you could start asking like kind of specific questions too. So, yeah, good question.
Yeah, right.
Would Ha work for a Zoom meeting? I don't think so. I think it's gotta be physical, because then it would affect. Because sometimes we might have to talk about like what we would have to do if someone was coming here or if we had to get out of here. So the Zoom meeting, I usually just say, it's good that we've gathered together. It's good that we are together. It's good questions. So then we get relational bases. So you have relational nouns and relational bases. They are almost the same thing, except this word base is just saying you could put a suffix on it. That's all it's telling you, just trying to make it easier to see how these things work. So khan would be near, out the house of, or visiting, or by. So you could say achande nagu. So there's day. Duchant uwagut. There's tea. So come by me, they went to them. Da kesh idat at aya. It's none of your business. It doesn't concern you. Sha da ehawuti. We were around the mountain. So again, you could say da de, da dach. You could say chande, chandach. So these are marked with this N dash. So it should be, it's this long dash as opposed to a hyphen. This font doesn't make it very long. Okay. So then we have suffixes. So a suffix can attach to a noun or an empty base. We're going to talk about the empty base. Basically, it's just the two E's in a row. And it exists because you can't put a suffix on a person. So that's why you say ach it, ach ide, ach idach, those types of things. Let's see, the open suffixes, so if it's open, so if it ends with a vowel, it will be the opposite of what's before. So you see neche, awu, yadu. Those are all the same suffix. And then if it's closed, it's going to be short and high. So we see hit de, towards the house. Neche, they are at home. Kahweqa, going for coffee. Hitdach, away from the house. Hityinach, through the house. Yadach wugud, they left from here. So now we're going to start looking at like some specific examples of these. Any questions? Okay. This is your list of suffixes. Okay. And so this entire slideshow will be put up. These are all important to know. They're important to know what they are, to spot them, to use them. Some of them are going to be a lot more common than others. And we're going to learn how they affect motion verbs later. But these can all attach to nouns. So the first one is dach. If it attaches to a vowel, it might just be a TX, right? That just might happen. And there's a couple of instances where you could say adach or kadach, and kadach and adach can just turn into the underlying X. There's not a whole lot of options for that. What those sound like would be ach and kach. So ach would be away from it, and then kach would be away from the top of it. De is to or toward. Oh, dach is also since. So you could put it onto, you'll see speakers who put it onto verbs. So for example, in the Robert Zuboff story, he says something like, Yidach chatzati yidach, from the time I was a young man. achjiyewutien. I've had a boat. So day, so these are opposites. Dach day, dach day, dach day. Day is towards or until. Right? So you could say Khashan khatsati day yak achjiyekwati. I'll have a boat till I'm an old person. Right? You could say stuff like that. Nach is through, along, or via. I don't see it as a time reference a whole lot. I guess maybe kanach and kanach, you'll see it like that. So they might say, Neskiaki kanach achewuti. It was there for 3 days. So yeah, I guess you could say it like that. Wo or these are the ones that are in gusu. And it's is, at, or are at. And it's used, usually there shouldn't be a verb there. Gusuhu, where are they? Nechehu, they're at home. Shkunuhu, they're at school. Awuhu, they are there, right? Yadu, wedu, heidu, and yudu are all responses to that are using the suffix.
Where does the D come from in those?
I don't know. It just closes up. Because I don't think, I think yawu and awu and heiwu and yuwu would just be too awkward. Because I think awu means it is there. So I think it has to have, or wait, you would have yawu, because yawu is on the face of it. Wewu is too weird sounding, I think. Yuwu sounds like an abdomen. And then heiwu, yeah, I just don't think you can have, so it puts that T, so it sounds like, it just pops up, I think, to give us some separation. I don't think there's actual meaning to it, but it's interesting, because there's other ways that will close, which I guess, since we're talking about it. When you have ya and he and we and yu, these ones, they are very common throughout the Lingít language. But when you attach things to them, they just behave in different ways in a couple different instances. For example, if you wanted to use this one, which is, you're really just trying to do that, and then you're going to end up with you do, and you're going to end up with we do, and you're going to end up with hey do, and you're going to end up with ya do. So there's a similar sort of thing, and these might be the only instances where it does that. So there's this other thing that we're going to learn about, which is ah. We've seen it in a couple different places already, right? So this is another pronoun, which means the one or the ones, okay? It's what we call partitive, so it means some of them. So you could say ah chwasaku. Like, for example, if there's 6 people over there, and you ask me, hasisukuka, you know them? I might say, ah chwasaku. I know some of them, right? So when you get these, so this kind of T pops up, because you get, that's what you get, is you have Y-A, then you have high tone, then you have a T that just pops up there. So for these ones, you're going to end up with this. You're going to have yata, hate-a, wait-a, and yuta, which are going to translate to this one, that one, and that one, way over there. So it's interesting, and just in terms of like how these are used, it could be people. It's not rude to use this for people. I've been in situations where I've asked a speaker how to say something, and they didn't know, or they didn't know the name of it. So they'd say, Wait, ask that one. But they do get these mysterious, like that T, like, I don't know why it's there. I don't know why this T is there. I think they're just there to give us a little bit of separation, which is interesting.
No, sheesh.
Oh. So the next suffix we have is which is at, usually resting at, residing at, and it could also be at the time of. So when we say yes in the fall, ta in the winter. And this is how we can differentiate between 2 days and Tuesday. Dechyagi, 2 days. Dechyagi on Tuesday. Right. There are times when there's some kind of ending
Just like
vowel, and the vowel will just get long. Is there a question? Okay. So the T is at. So the interesting thing with these four is with and t and ch. Those are all at. But you got to say, how is it there? Is it just generally there and we're not going to use a verb to talk about it? Is it residing or resting there? Did it recently arrive there? And is it moving around or repeatedly coming back to? So that's the difference between those three. And you'll see that these do, especially these two, they pop up on verbs. So you'll say, ach it yiddishi. You helped me. Ach ich ittishi. You regularly help me. So the CH can pop up on a noun, usually to mark who's doing the verb, but it could also mark what they're doing the verb with. So you could say, kuhidach a shawachich. They clubbed them on the head with a pencil. Qa is usually most commonly going after. Sometimes it's waiting for, but I usually hear that as yiqa. And we'll learn how to do that. Like if you use some sort of verb that talks about being somewhere, I could say yiqa. I'm standing here waiting for you. And then you have n, which is with. Those are all the suffixes. So like this stage of learning Lingít, we see these lists of things and we start to use them and start to look for them. Okay. So for example, let's see, we did that. These also affect motion. Like for some of you, were asking why is it uwagut and why is it wugut? The short answer is uwagut signals that it made it to its goal. Wugut would be like it went there. So Lingít can signal those two things differently. You could say went there and made it, or you could just say went there. Doesn't mean they didn't make it. And this is cued by that suffix. So these suffixes are also related to types of motion. So hit uwagut, they arrived at the house. Hit de wugut, they went towards the house. At wugut, they walked around. Achgut, they regularly walk over in that area. So we're going to get some help from this little guy. So everybody say kanaltzak,
Kanatsak.
Ak.
kanaltzak.
Kanatsak.
Ak.
And if you speak an inland dialect of Lingít, you'll say kaltzak,
Kalsak.
kaltzak,
Kanatsak.
Ak.
nadak,
Nadar.
Dak.
nadak,
Nadar.
Oh,
nadak shakabu with kanaltzak.
Dak.
Nadar.
With
Nadar.
Ak.
Nadakshakabuwikanatak.
The Takshika,
The dog.
The
Na
duck
dak
show
shukawu
Jeez. So as far as the word order and how this works, we have nadak, which is the thing we're talking about, shaka in front of, w to be at, we that, kanatak, that guy, right? So then we see some of these things as well, these directional terms have these bigger uses. Shuka means in front of or ahead of. But it also means an ancestor. So we say ha shuka, we're talking about our ancestors. And it also means ahead of in terms of time. So for example, it was a very rare thing that students came here and I was here before them. But it happened today. So you could say, ha, ach shakat hat iyagut, right? And so if I were to write that out, I would say, well, maybe instead of ha, I'll just say ha, ach shukat hat iyagut. What does that say?
I was here before.
Hi,
I arrived here
before
before you.
place.
I arrived here before you.
You arrived here.
Is that a pinched A?
Why would we have an apostrophe after the A? Have you folks seen this yet?
No.
Okay,
Because that's the way you wrote it.
that's always the correct answer, right? Okay, we don't do this very often, but this is another way to write. This is the only instance where Tlingit has two ways to write one sound. And the other way you can write it is with a period.
Oh, so it's like a clause.
The only time we will write a glottal like this is when it's at the end of a word. So without it, this word would be ha. But with it, this word is ha. That's how you say this word. Ha.
It is a pinched A.
So yes, and so this is, there's another instance. So if you had a place called Brown Bear House, you would also put a period right there. Oops. Yes. And that just shows you that that's not SH, that's S and then an H. So these are anomalies in our spelling system. We usually say like one symbol, one sound, we've got it down. But then there's a couple different exceptions in terms of when you're spelling. It's very rare, you will very rarely have to do this, but there are cases because there are verbs where sometimes the classifier is just a single S, right? So ha, achshakat, hat, iyagut. Let's come back to the translation. Oh, and hat means, I guess you could say, oh my. Maybe that's a nice, it's like a mild surprise. I'm surprised.
I was here before you arrived.
Okay, so if I wanted to say I was here before you, it would be a little, we're going to drop the ha part. Oops. So I would say, shukat, hat, huakut.
Oh,
That would be, I was here before you. So what do you think this one would be?
you were here after.
You were here.
You were here before me. Before me. So if you changed shukat to it, that would be after. Ach it hat iyagut, you got here after me. It hat huakut, I got here after you. Right? So we're seeing just a little bit more complexity in the language where we could start changing things. Who's doing the verb, who we're talking about, in this case in a time reference. Okay, this little squirrel just made things more complicated. Okay, let me make a notes page.
Sakhyakhyati.
Okay. I'll get rid of those so I don't get confused later. So there's a little bit of a color scheme that's going on in here that will change a little bit later. But we're just showing, what we're looking for here is we're showing the suffix in green and we're showing the base, this relational base in blue. Okay, that's just the color scheme for this particular thing. And now we're going to move this guy around, then we're going to take our break. Or we're going to move this thing around. Nadak egu wikanatak.
Nadak egu wekanatak.
Wekanatak.
Nadak egu wikanatak.
Nadak egu wekanatak.
And how would we translate that?
The squirrel is behind the table.
Squirrel's behind the table. So what we have is we have take, and when we add that G, that K changes to a G. We've already learned this rule, and we see it applies to other types of vowel suffixes. Nadak kabu wikanatak.
Nadak kawu
Kawu.
wekanatak.
Kanasak.
Nadak kabu wikanatak.
Nadak kawu wekanatak.
How would we translate that?
Squirrel is
On
the table.
On the table, right? So now you know how to say on the table. Nadak kabu. We can't put a verb. You can't say this squirrel is running or dancing or jumping. Now you'd have to switch it. Yeah, nadak kayu chayu. Sometimes it sounds better to have we or ya in between. So you say nadak kabu wiguk'a. That cup is on the table. Nadak tayiwu wikanatak.
Nadak tayiwu wekanatak.
Nadak tayiwu wikanatak.
Nadak tayiwu wekanatak.
How do we translate that one?
Squirrel is under the table.
Under the table, yeah.
Or perhaps below the table.
Oh, yeah, well, underneath, beneath. If it was below the table, like the table, this one might not work, but like, let's say there's something on a hill, and the hill is like a house. Okay, so here's the, oops. Cue the balloons, okay. Here's a house, let me not make any gestures. Here's a hill, here's a kanatak. Hit ye wu with kanatak. So ye, this one's getting tricky though. This one is tricky. So ye is below. Tayi is beneath. But I shouldn't have picked a house because ye, we're going to see, is also inside of a building.
But like if you said
Maybe
my
it's a
house
rock
is-
instead of a house.
Okay.
But if you were,
Tayiwu with kanatak. We solved it. Okay, gonna cheesh.
because if you have two houses on a hill and I live below you, I'm not underneath you, but I'm below you on the mountain kind of thing.
Yes. So ye would be below. And then there's other, you could also say down towards the beach, and then you can also say behind on the mountainside. We'll get to that. First, we gotta move the squirrel around a little bit more. Okay, so now let's look at it. So that wo, you can't have a verb. So what if you have a verb? Now we're gonna switch to T. This one works really well for certain, especially like these positional ones. Nadak hunt hun wikanatak.
Nadak hun wekanatak.
Nadak hunt hun wikanatak.
Nadak hun wekanatak.
So we just keep in mind this hun refers to nadak, right? So nadak next to, arriving at, standing, they are standing, that squirrel. Nadak de yanagat wikanatak.
Nadak wekanatak.
Nadak de yanagat wikanatak.
Nadakte.
Nadakte
And
yanagutwe
good
kanatsak.
sock.
So I saw a word that was like hundage.
Say it again.
Can you go over the first word with the W a little bit better?
Table, towards the table, move.
Table word. Okay, yeah.
Just pronouncing it.
You saw hundage. Is that what you said?
No, hundage with an N, Hanich.
Oh, like hundage. That would be sha kasha de hundage. So that means so kasha de honey has hun in it, standing. So it's a word for leader, and it means stands at the head of the people.
Oh.
But then when you put this, now that becomes a name or a noun. So the ch means he did something, or they did something. So yes, okay. So on its own, you have nadak,
Nadak.
nadak.
A dog.
Nadak.
So you're blowing out your little candle with that word. Nadak,
Nadak.
Nadak.
nadak day,
A dog day.
nadak day.
A dog day.
Dakte.
That's slowing it way down. So you do have na, dak, day, right? So when you say it fast, nadak day.
Good dog.
Nadakte.
You do have this little right there.
Dog.
Nakte.
But a lot of people are probably gonna say nadak day, but nadak day. So you gotta have that little rounded bit.
Dakte.
Dog day.
Nadakdach ya nagatwe kanatsak.
A dog.
Nadak.
And a
Yanagutwe
good
kanatsak.
Nadakdach ya nagatwe kanatsak.
A dog.
Yanagutwe kanatsak.
Can someone say the cat is walking towards the dog?
Cake day young a good way to shit.
We do. Kate day, ya nagut. Douche. Yeah, what? Yeah, what? Can someone say the wolf is walking away from the tree?
Astach.
Astach yanagutwe gut.
Okay, yeah, what? Yeah, what? Nadak da ya nashihwe kanatsak.
Dog.
Da yanashik kanatsak.
Okay. 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 Any questions about that stuff? Okay. There are these three things, which I think we'll come back to next week. But I do want to talk about this napkin, then we'll take our break. Okay. So I had to make a couple of additions. So we were having a language gathering in Tlein. Tlein aye habutian, hayukatangidat yechitunayan. Gwash dachadu shutak shuhichen. So about 7 years ago, we had a language gathering in Tlein. Ya ach kik aya shkuye chiduasa. Kanachwedu tuasaku awasku adat ka yik tu tak yi. So this relative of mine, he's like a little brother. His name is Tim Hall. Shkuye. He's like, I just want to understand how these work because these are very similar concepts. And so he made this great list we're having lunch, and so it's like on this little napkin. So I was like, the napkin is legendary. So ka is on or in a spillable or open container. Yik is floating in the water. It's in shallow water. It's in a tree. It's in a forest. It's in a road. And it's in a creature's body. Tu is in a closed container, which includes your head and your mind and your thoughts. Box with a lid inside people's minds and spirits and emotions and it's inside of abstract concepts. Talk is in bodies of water, holes, pits, cavities, fire, and in your eyeballs. Tukka is on the bottom of, like, would be on the bottom of the river. And then Yi is inside of buildings or a home. And then for some reason, we also wrote, or he wrote, Keshka dishir. People don't praise themselves, which I don't know why that's there, but there's an important piece of information. So just sort of thinking like fitting these things in your mind is important, because what you're going to find, for me, I battled with yik for a long time. Like my brain just rejected. I would use yik for all kinds of stuff. But this is where it gets wild, because you'll say things like, de yik, we're walking down the trail. But it should be yik. And in some cases it'll be yik. But you could yik into a boat, and that boat can yik into the river. But because a boat is yik in the river, a road is a river. That's just how the Lingít mind works. That's why it's also yik. It doesn't matter if it's flat. It doesn't have to do with being flat. It's maybe a different concept than that. Okay, anything before break time?
This lesson is great.
Okay.
Okay. Come back at 5 till. Okay. So on our break, we're listening to some speed listening in Lingít. So listening to some faster talkers, Susie James, J.B. Fawcett. Cyril George had a real nice mellow pace. There are some speakers who would talk pretty fast. And just in terms of like preparing ourselves, some of the things that you can do is just to have a lot of Lingít around. And so from our class page, you can link off to, there's Lingít videos, there's Lingít audio. You go to town in terms of if you're looking for stuff to just listen to. I think it's good to, as you folks are getting into these phases where you're learning more and more about the language, it's good to have stuff that you're familiar with. Like just keep listening to talk, duk where you know the translation, and your brain can do an awful lot of in-between work and from language to language. I think there's a ton of stuff that your brain does behind the scenes if you just keep listening to it. But then also just grab some stuff that you haven't heard before and just listen to it and just see what happens. I think also, because one of the big things that's absent from our language learning is a place where we have to know the language, right? Because everyone will switch over for us, or more commonly, nobody knows the language. It's very rare to be in any physical space where there's more than 3 people who can know the language at some level, right? So you can surround yourself with some things. And so there's video recordings. There's this Ha Shagun series that came out of Whitehorse. That was amazing, has a bunch of speakers. There's we just looked at a video. So I do have a folder for Lingít video. I do have a folder for Lingít audio, and there is also the Dauenhour collection. So we have hundreds of hours of stuff at our fingertips. You know, we don't have hundreds of hours every single day of our lives, but you know, as we're doing this work, a lot of the work we do in intermediate Lingít is just sort of like a little chunk here, a little chunk here, a little chunk here. Watch these chunks come together. So you have to sort of supplement. You would be doing yourself a huge favor as a learner if you could just add this to your collection. And some of it is intentional listening. Like you're listening, like I want to see if I can understand this. I want to see if I could follow it. And some of it is just have it on a bit in the background. Like don't ignore it, but just have it there so that your brain continues to get used to that language being around you. Okay. Back to our story. So here is where we left off. Just to summarize, when it was cold, life was difficult, big sickness came, a bunch of people died. This girl Sahan, her family's all gone. She's hardworking and kind, she's alone. the leader saw how kind she was and how she helped people, and because of that, he adopted her so that she would be a relative to his own daughter. Sahan and the daughter of this leader went to the water, and this daughter of the leader, daughter of the chief, she liked to drink cold water, scoop it up in her hands, and drink it out of her hands. Now that gets us to sentence number 9. Can I get someone to read it?
I have a random question of how do you type out the U with the 2 dots and the 0 marker and the square root thing?
So this, and this, and this.
Yes.
Okay, so if you
The
Crippen keyboard, which you would need, which I think for now is only available on a Apple computer. If you hold down the Option key and press Y, then you get this Y with the 2 dots over it. We use this to say this is a Y, but it might become a W. That's what that usually signals, right? So for example, there are some people who say Kuhaantí, and there are some people who say Kuhaantí, and you're saying the same thing. But for most communities, you would expect this oo vowel to cause it to switch to the W. So you're going to hold down the Alt key, and then you press Y, and then you get it. If you hold down the Alt key and press the number 2, you get the root marker. So that's the number 2. If you hold down the Alt key and press number 1, then you take your hands off of it, and then you press 0, you get the 0 marker.
Okay, I'll try that.
That's a good question.
It doesn't seem to work on.
That's hard.
What's that?
It doesn't seem to work on Windows. The only one that works is the square root.
Yeah, it doesn't work on Windows, and so you can copy and paste them, and you might, let's see.
Is that Wikipedia,
You
right?
have a symbols option under symbols.
Could be under symbols, and this 0 marker, just make sure you're using the 0 marker and not the Norwegian letter, like in Oslo. However, I don't know how they pronounce it, but they have a different thing. It's an O with it. I don't know what that thing's called.
Like an O, but it's like O.
Yeah, and it looks very similar to this one.
There are some alt codes for the Windows keyboard. If you just look up alt codes, there's a whole list of them. And the Y with the 2 dots and the 0 with the slash are in there. I haven't found the square root though.
Okay. Yeah, you might, and whatever you're working, you might be able to set up shortcut keys where you can get it to paste for you. If you're using a mobile device, you can install the chert keyboard, and both of those symbols are in there. So you could type it on like your phone.
I wanted to mention that if you don't have like an numpad, then all the codes don't really move.
Okay. Sheesh. I'll talk to some folks and see. There might be some folks who work in Windows computers that know. I know that Jill Meservey had developed a keyboard, Custine, so I'll ask her if she has one that has those things in it. Sheesh. Okay, who's going to read this sentence for me?
I can read it.
Sheesh. And whoever said that online, you can get the next one. Okay, so I am gonna erase that stuff. And is anybody spot any verbs?
Idanak. Yavsaka.
So we're gonna color these. And we're gonna color these. Okay. So what is ijindach? Hey, there's a duck thing. We're looking at that.
Does it mean like your hand going away from?
From your hands.
From your hand.
From your hand.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then sahan is a name. So that gets us to our verbs. Anybody figure out any of these, either of these?
Eat the duck, drink. Don't drink.
Don't drink.
Yes. So the general pattern is a little more complicated, but instead of klesh or hesh, we have shish. L, high tone I, L. When you have shish in front of a verb, you should expect it to end with an underlined K. Those are like bookends that combine to say, don't do that verb. Sheshichak, don't eat it. Sheshat ishik, don't touch it. In this case, sheshitanak, don't drink it. What about ye ayausaka?
Stanok, the drinking.
Idana.
Told her.
So idana is drinking. You are drinking or drink it. Sheshitanak.
Told, like she told, they told.
Yes.
Said.
So in this case, there's these two different but very closely related verbs. Ye yawaka and ye ayausaka. What are they and how are they different?
Ye yawaka is they said. Ye ayausaka is like they told them.
Yes. They said blank, right? So you're going to have some, these are where you're using exact words, right? They said this thing. It's not about the information. It's not about the story. It's like, let me quote them, right? Mom said no. And then they said blank to them. So in this case, this object, that's who's being told the thing, right? And there's another way you could talk about telling people stuff, but this is to say exact quotations, right? For example, I was riding around with my kids when they were babies, and I had some sort of tape of nursery rhymes or something. There was a song that went like this in English. I'm picking up a baby bumblebee. Won't my mommy be so proud of me? And I was angry. I was like, what are we doing? Picking up bees. So I made a Lingít version and taught it to the kids at the language nest. Achwasanuk wikandis ajiyadi. Achtachat yosaka ishide. So here's our lyrics. Achwase nukwe gandats aji yadi achla chat yausaka itli day. I think it goes the other way. Okay, how do we get a little extra translation work tonight? What does that say?
Picking up a baby bumblebee.
I
My
picked,
mother said to me, don't.
I picked up a baby bumblebee. My mother said to me, knock it off, don't do it. That's how my kids, I was like, what is this song teaching our children? Don't mess with bees? Okay. So in this case, don't, and so now when we come back, we can say, okay, that goes, and then that goes, Sahan said to her, right? Just sort of keeping a lot of third person stuff. So our English brain has to keep track of who's doing what. And we have to code that information
I already had a daughter,
into the translation.
like he adopted someone, so. Oh.
Okay. I have a page of notes. I'll save the notes to our web page so you have the lyrics to the Bumblebee Baby song. Very important. Okay. Who wanted to read the last one but didn't get a chance to? Now's your
That
time.
was me.
All right, let's hear it.
Ten nisagit wehin yegi we ach wutudleseyi ye shlegas ye kinugu.
Sheesh. Kaidni sakit we hin yegi we akwatut lesayi ye shakas ye kinuku. Okay. Verbs. Any verbs here?
Nisagit.
Forget.
Kinuku. Kinuku.
Udlisai.
Ududlisai,
Udasai. 3.
Kinugu,
But wait. There's more.
Shiga.
Yeah, oh well. This is verb heavy. So we do have 2 sentences. I guess I should have made this into its own. So maybe I'll just, well, I'm not going to do it now. We'll just fix it like that. Oops.
Oh, forgot. Yeah.
So we have we. So maybe we'll just say that, right? Because we got a noun right after it. What's hin yegi?
The
Water
spirit of the water.
helper.
Water spirit helper?
down to the water.
Spirit helper of the water. I'd say. Maybe.
So here's a big hint on how this next part works. So we talked about these bookmark things that we just saw up here. So like klish and this underlined K. When you have those 2 things, you have don't verb. Don't do the verb, right? Don't speak. Was that no doubt? I'm quoting no doubt. Okay. Here's another sort of bookmark thing. You're going to have or uk, verby yeah. This one, when you say uk, verb yeah, this construction is the place the verb happened. If you just go look up Lingít place names, you're going to see a whole bunch of them with yeah on there. The place where Raven swung, the place where this thing happened, the place where, and you can, it doesn't have to be like big capital letter place names. You could say Lady Gaga, Achwagudiya. That's the place where Lady Gaga walked, right? Yesh, Achwagudiya. That's the place where Raven walked. So in this case, you have so technically, this thing is a noun, but it does contain a verb. So we're going to treat it like a verb. So I guess this is almost all verbs. That water spirit, verb, 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 verb. So let's just go, anybody figure any of them out?
Kini Sagit is like falling into the water or going into the water.
Let's go look for some Geet verbs. We are going to go into, let's go here.
Find that one.
So what we're looking for is we're going to have K in front of it, and we're going to have an S classifier, and we're going to have Geet. So those are the things we're looking for. So let's switch to our verb dictionary. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna go look for Geet. Go down to the G. So here's an S classifier right here. Se. Here's one with K in front of it. To wake up or to rouse from sleep. So this one, you would have iskid. It would have something different. So the DZ classifier, so this one has the S classifier right there. So if we go just look up wake, so since we found it, we'll just continue our practice of looking these verbs up once we find them. And here it is. They woke me at 9 o'clock. I woke up in the morning early. So this would-get is actually, these are actually technically two different verbs. So the top one with an S classifier means to wake someone up. Okay? The bottom one with the D plus S classifier with K in front of it means to wake up. So you say kech I woke up. And you say kechet yisekit, you woke me up. Okay? So in this case, when we have K ni skit, I'll help you out on it. So this is you are waking up that water spirit. That's what this part is saying. What about wudut lisa? We'll take the suffix off. If you take the suffix off, you have wudut lisa.
I came up with something like rest.
Okay.
That'd be the sleeping water spirit.
Yeah, so sa, we'll go like, if we go look up sa and we're looking for this DL classifier, and you guys, you got it. But then we'll also take a look at how this sort of construction works. So here's the DL classifier, sa, like that's it, rest, right? So again, we'll just go look up the verb so that we can get in the habit of looking up the sample sentences, other information. So here's qatush sa, that's a hortative, let's rest. Kesh utsechnuch, they never rest. Yeah, so get some rest. Don't be the never resting person. Okay. So coming back, like when we talk about this, so we just said ach verbi ye, the place where the verb happens. So now if we have ach wudut lisa ye, what do you think we got?
It's the
The
place
water
where the
spirit
spirit
that rests
rests.
here.
Yes, you're waking up that water spirit at the place where it rests, right? Lot of information packed in there, right? And just in terms of like learning how these things work, this verbi yeah, you're gonna see this. It's gonna pop up from time to time. What about shikas?
Forbidden.
It is forbidden.
So when we talk about
Forbidden to swallow.
shikas in Lingít, when they say that's shikas, that means you better not do that because bad stuff is coming. So this word shikas is linked to this other word jinaha. Jinaha means this is all that bad stuff that's coming your way. For example, bragging about yourself. If you stood up and you're like, I'm the greatest Lingit dancer. I'm just really good. Like that's shiras. You're probably gonna break your leg. Like that's probably what's gonna happen to you. Like it's gonna be really bad. Like this very bad energy that comes around from doing something that violates the order of the world. And so in this case, shikas ye ki nugu. What about the ye ki nugu part?
I
It's to
didn't
be.
find,
Go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say I didn't find the precise verb, but the root looks like it's like can't see both my windows at once. like to behave or do things a certain way.
I came up with swallow. I don't know why forbidden to swallow, but
Yeah, well, there's
I'll just,
nuke. Let's just go look it up because we're gonna see there. Nuke is one
or
of
forbidden.
all-star verb roots, meaning like it's one of the verb roots with a whole bunch of verbs that are associated with it. And I'll tell you folks where this also gets confusing is there is a dialect difference here. So there's this neek verb that a lot of us know. It's usually high tone, neek, to be sick or to be hurt. Right? So we look at this stuff, we see hurt, sad, sick, annoy, sad, pretend, bother, well, to pretend to be sick. So for northern Tlingit, we would use nuke. And there's also a couple of different verb roots that are nuke. Where it gets a little confusing, there's a few different things here that can get a little bit confusing. One is southern Tlingit, and also some, like I think speakers in Cake, would say neek, where northern speakers would say nuke. So there's a nuke for sit down, but we're looking for that k. We gotta find that k. Once we saw that ki nuke, one thing that we'll learn is ki is k and I. Put those together and you're gonna get ki. So we're looking for k, and we see it right here, kuya nuke, which we would write now as k zero nuke. To behave like, to do, to act in a certain way, right? And so in beginning Tlingit, I think we learned this phrase, wasakiyanuk. So wasakiyanuk is interpreted as, what are you doing? But we got to look at the cultural context here. Like that is technically, what are you doing? Right? But if you think about, there's certain ways people can ask that in English, right? Like if I just walked in the room and I looked at you and I gave you a certain look, I was like, what are you doing? Right? And if I said it like that, you would assume you're doing something wrong. So if you just started a conversation, like if you just looked at someone and said, wasakiyanuk, they'd be like, what's the matter with you? Right? And so it is kind of saying like, what are you doing? And it assumes you might be doing something wrong. Not all the time, but a lot of speakers who've talked about learning from beginning Tlingit, they said you got to add this cultural context. So in this case, what you're doing. And we're right at time, so we'll just look up behave like and do, just so that we can stay in the habit of fully looking up our verbs. So you see, there's that dialect thing right there. They are behaving that way all the time. They are like that all the time. They don't behave like that. They don't do such things. Chak Long time ago, they used to kill people who behaved like that. It's a pretty hardcore sentence right there. People used to kill them. And then we had do. And then we go down to Wasakianik dialect. I wasn't doing anything. I'm just writing. And then in that case, you are doing something if you're writing, but this is saying I wasn't doing anything wrong. I'm just writing. Okay, good stuff. We got to sentence 10. So our plan will be to get up to 15, maybe a little bit more on Tuesday. So for Tuesday, you're going to bring a couple sentences that just talk about what's on your mind. So we can have we're going to force conversation. If you want to respond to what someone says, aces, fireworks, awesome. If you want, I'll I'll start by I'll just start like we usually do. I'll say some things that I'm thinking of, and then you'll hear me say, Wasayi tu wuch, Datasayi tu wasagu yuchi Adusaju tu wasagu yuchi watan. Something like that. You'll hear me say something like that. And that means I'm turning it over to y'all. Somebody speak.
If you want to not be rude when you're asking somebody what they're doing, would it be better to say "tasaye ine" or something like that? Okay.
And so, yeah. And when we asked Nora, when would you say, we said there's two ways to say what are you doing, right? She's like, yes. And we say, well, which one would you use? And she says, it depends on what they're doing. I said, so you have to know what someone's doing to ask them what they're doing? She's like, sure. It's like, okay, sounds good to me. But generally, Sakiyanuk is like, how are you behaving? Dasaye is, what are you working on?
You're like in the back of class throwing paper airplanes in your t-shirt.
Yeah, wasakiyunuk. That'd be a wasakiyunuk situation.
Yeah.
With a certain way to say it. Wasakiyunuk. Yiish kaitla adeke yi outletu. Is that how your mom and dad taught you?
So when my children are supposed to be doing their homework, that's a wasakiyanuk.
That is. Wasakiyunuk. Kahit letu de kukikut. You're gonna walk right into trouble. Oh, we went to the scolding sessions. Okay, have a great weekend, folks. Get up to line 15 if you haven't already. Bring a couple sentences to just share with us. Verse.
Do you put those new what are you doing things in the notes too? Because I'm gonna be using wasakiyanuk quite a bit, I'm sure, between my cats and my children.
Practice some with my cats.
What's the key?
Okay, I'll put them in.
Just my cats, I think, probably understand more Lingít than most animals up in this area of the state.
I think my cat understands the word for food and door and bed, probably.
Okay.
But also, if I spoke Lincoln, they'd probably get that.
Or at least they hear a lot more Lingít, even if they don't understand it.
Yeah, it's always a question, right? Because sometimes you can say something to an animal and you're saying something different, but you're using a tone and they just catch the tone. But some of them catch the words. Like, I knew someone had a really smart dog and she'd say, go find the cat. And it would just go look around, go find the cat. So they understand a lot. They can understand a lot of Lingít too. All right.
When I first started seeing the sounds of Tlingit, when I was getting like the and stuff like that, my cats was like